Rangers fans, welcome to season 4 of Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast powered by Believe Network and also presented by FanDuel. I'm Andrew Chelney. That's Nick Zararis. On this episode, we will get to the letter, what happens now, and a whole lot more. Nick, other than that, how was the play?
I mean, they smoked the Flyers. The Flyers, who, by the way, are doing what the Rangers say they're about to do, where we're not tearing it all the way down to the studs. We're going to give Christian Dvorak a 5-year deal. If you want to forecast where the Rangers are going to be in 2 years, it's right now where the Flyers are. It's where the Senators are. And we've talked about this incessantly. You don't want to be near the middle. You either want to be as all in as you can be to try and win in that exact moment because your best players are at their peak ages, or you want to be a 10-win team and have as good a chance as possible at picking in the top 5. Pushing for the middle is only good for general managers, coaches, and the guys who are already on the team. And look, we have to understand that people are going to act in their own self-interests, and we talk about that a lot, that the interests of a decision maker or a coach aren't always going to necessarily be in alignment with what's best for the team, the future of certain players. We have dove into that on this show numerous times when we talk about the development of young players over the years, whether we talk about the ones from 2017 to 2021 or the ones who are still here, the Kakos, formerly Lafreniere, Schneider, K'Andre Miller, formerly, of we need these guys to become something. And you see it now in real time, the long-term consequences of the Rangers' organizational issues. And there's a lot to dive into, but just starting with the premise of this is a retool and not a rebuild. So that's largely tied because you have a top 5 goalie and a top 5 defenseman. And having a top 5 goalie on a team that's probably not trying to lose, but it would be better if it would lose, isn't exactly the most ideal place to be either. We have seen guys like UC Saros drag bad Predators teams into 7 and 8 seeds over the last handful of years. That's the one position where a guy being that good could genuinely alter the trajectory of your team. But talking about this in the context of a retool. So what does that mean? Well, if we're not tearing it down to the studs, that means our long-term building blocks, our Shesterkin, our Fox, Gavrikov, JT Miller, Zibanejad, those guys who have long-term contracts, who have some form of no trade protection. I imagine Will Cooley. But beyond that, there's not a lot set in stone here. Susie expiring at the end of the year, Borgen, they have him, but I think if there was a world where someone would take him, they would probably do that. And Trocheck is probably your best trade chip. Maybe Braden Schneider if you really think the upside there is enough to entice someone. But the problem ultimately with the retool mindset and why I think this is a bad idea, you need to nail a draft. The only way to get out of where they are now to where they think they can go. And make no mistake about it, Chris Drury looks at the situation in Washington over the last handful of years and what Dallas did at the beginning of this decade as his blueprint. How did the Capitals go from dead to decent and maybe have a conference final run in them? And how did Dallas go from the end of that Sagan, Ben, Klingberg, Ben Bishop group to where they are now? Both absolutely nailed a handful of draft picks. And in Washington's case, they made strategic gambles. They turned Darcy Kemper into Pierre-Luc Dubois. They signed Dylan Strome, who at the time was an untendered RFA free agent from the Blackhawks. They put chips in for Jacob Chychrun, who has thrived there. And most importantly, they've given the guys like Connor McMichael, the Protas brothers, Hendrix Lapierre, all of those young guys time and given them roles to play alongside an Ovechkin at various points. Dylan Strome was a point-per-game player last year, riding shotgun with 39-year-old Alex Ovechkin. You can do this. It's just the margin for error is infinitesimal, and we see the types of players Chris Drury likes. Those aren't the guys who bounce back and have point-per-game seasons. Best case, if you bring Trocheck in, like let's say in the hypothetical, a Trocheck type player, okay, he had 60 points, he plays okay defense, he helps your power play a little bit. Those are all useful. That's not getting you to a Stanley Cup, as we said in 2022. When they signed Vincent Trocheck, he's a good player, but he's not the difference between them beating Tampa in 2022 and them losing in 2022.
No, I agree. The thing that really, when you want to do a rebuild or a retool or whatever word that you want to use in this situation, the goal of selling a lot of your best players is acquiring young players and acquiring draft picks. For the Rangers, the past 30 years, the problem has been drafting and developing young players. The Rangers have heavily relied on signing free agents or getting players essentially, hidden away in the NCAA or in the KHL or in other area or wherever else, hidden away and let them develop in that system. Let them develop in college. Let them, let the other leagues develop these players, and then they'll come in already having, a lot of these skill sets that the Rangers are looking for with, an 85% finished product. Okay, now here we are. We'll take care of the rest, and look how great our draft picks are. But the Rangers don't really have a great track record of developing talent in-house. They don't. Hartford has not really been a great, hotbed of, oh wait, this guy was drafted in the 5th round and he's all of a sudden tearing it up because the coach believes in him or whatever, and now he's becoming a top 6. Like, when was the last time the Rangers drafted somebody that you thought off the bat, wait, like this guy went from nobody to, wait, he's a top 6 player or a top 4 defenseman? That hasn't happened in a long time. So, in order to say, okay, we're going to rebuild, we're going to retool, we're going to do all these things, like that's great. And, I would hope that the Rangers are now officially out on Kiefer Sherwood, and amongst other names that should never have been in the conversation to begin with. You still need to then nail those picks, which the Rangers haven't really done over the past handful of years. And on top of that, even if you do nail those picks, you have to develop properly, which they haven't really done either. And you can say, well, Cooley has been a success story, Noah Lobb has been a success story, and I'll give you that. But at the same time, they're not game-breaking players. And if you are going to trade guys like Panarin, like Trocheck, you are going to acquire players that are potentially game-breaking. They're going to demand a good amount in the trade market once the deadline comes. Especially Panarin should get a first and a top prospect. I would imagine Trocheck might get more than what we think he's going to get because he's a center, and every team that is trying to make the playoffs needs a center. So the Rangers could get a good haul for Vinny Trocheck, especially because he's somehow on Team USA. So if nothing else, like, that should also bolster his trade value. Like, look, he's good enough for Team USA. He's a great two-way player. Whatever you want to, tell yourself to increases his trade value, you're going to get a lot for these players. The problem isn't trading these guys away. It's what you do with the assets that you get when you trade them away. What do you do with that first round pick? What do you do with the 22-year-old player that you get in return for Panarin or Trocheck? You need to actually take those assets. Maybe you flip them. Maybe you flip Panarin's first round and top prospect for a player that you can fill into that hole that Panarin left now. Maybe you do that instead of hoping that your prospect development team works out. Because again, like you said, you have Fox and you have Shesterkin. You cannot wait 5 more years and just to see if potentially that player that you drafted is going to work out or not. You don't have the time, you don't have the leeway, and Chris Drury knows he doesn't have the leash to wait that long to see what happens. So
I want to build off of something you had said before, because I was working on something. I got to finish writing it. But when you think about the team from last decade, the early 2010s teams that went to the conference finals 3 times, Lundqvist, 5 years in Sweden before he came over after being drafted. McDonough, 3 years at Wisconsin. Mark Stahl, one of the outliers, one more year in junior, then goes to the AHL. Dan Girardi, 2 years extra in the OHL before he signs as an undrafted free agent. Ryan Callahan, OHL till he's 20 years old. Rick Nash, drafted first overall by the Blue Jackets. Derek Stepan, 3 years at Wisconsin. Derek Brassard, AHL with the Blue Jackets organization, another top 5 pick. Chris Kreider, 3 years at Boston College. Carl Hagelin, 4 years at Michigan. Jimmy Vesey, 4 years at Harvard. Buchnevich, 3 years in the KHL. Kevin Hayes, 3 years at Boston College. All of this is to say, not only are these guys developing in other places, the team was already competitive enough that they didn't need to shoehorn these guys in. And I really do think that's some of what the flaw of the last few years has been, and ultimately why guys like Lafreniere, Kakko, Miller, Braden Schneider haven't really gotten to what their potential would lead you to believe, because they've been pushed into roles that aren't conducive with their skill sets, because the Rangers had an immediate need. You know, I was talking about it over the weekend with somebody. Kakko was not ready for the NHL at 18 years old. He was entirely out of his depth. The game was way too fast. He was way too slow. And that first season was about survival. And when you're trying to survive, you're not learning. You're not getting better. And to similar extents, you could say the same thing about the way that K'Andre Miller was brought along, though I would point out Miller probably the best of the 9 draft first-round picks between 2017 and 2021. And he, of course, spent 2 years at Wisconsin before coming to the NHL, so you can draw that parallel there as well. And then you think about the guys on the team presently. Panarin, about 4 years in the KHL before coming over and not as a rookie at 26 to the Blackhawks. Adam Fox, 4 years at Harvard. Zibanejad, top 10 pick from the Senators, plays over there for several years. Lafreniere, as we said, 18 years old into the NHL, third-line minutes, not a ton of responsibility, can't really build his game, being told, well, we're trying to make the playoffs. I don't have time for you and Kakko to figure it out, by David Quinn. Trocheck, drafted by another organization. Gavrikov, drafted by another organization. Borgen, drafted by another organization. JT Miller, who we've discussed more than once, ironically, drafted here, did not work out particularly well, went to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay had him for, I want to say, 2 seasons, looked around and said, I don't think so, and then traded him to Vancouver and won 2 straight cups, and now they are getting the end of JT Miller's prime. Will Cooley, you pointed out as somebody you could say as an organizational success story, as a second-round pick who's going to be a consistent NHLer from the next rest of the decade. But we have a track record of this now, and what I would point out to the people who want to say, well, Kravtsov and Anderson were busts. Sure. They were. They're not in the NHL anymore, less than 10 years after being drafted. Both of them had off-the-ice stuff where Anderson said there was stuff behind the scenes giving him a hard time. He said that the Rangers made him play through 2 broken feet. Kravtsov, berated by Drury in front of the entire team during a practice, told you're quitting on your team when he asked to go back to Russia because the AHL situation was untenable for him. And yes, those guys have a responsibility. It's the same conversation we have about Lafreniere. Has the team put him in the best possible position to succeed? No. Is it also incumbent upon him to try and find a way to succeed? Yes. Both are true at the same time. And the same thing is true of Anderson and of Kravtsov. And the reason I'm not as on those guys' cases as a lot of people are, you look at the last 15, 20 years of Rangers drafting, and those are not outlier situations where they take guys, don't really have a plan for them, and don't put them in a position to succeed. If the Rangers had a Capitals hit rate, a Stars hit rate, a Hurricanes hit rate on their guys who go through their AHL, Tampa Bay hit rate, go through their AHL organization, get to the NHL at 23, 24, become consistent contributors, then I'd be a bit more inclined to say, yeah, those guys were flops. And the other side of it is you had them in the pre-scouting environment. You had them in the pre-draft. You interviewed these guys. You sat down with them. You got a feel for them, and you felt comfortable enough to take them with 9th and 7th overall picks, and you did not put them in a position to succeed. They didn't respond to your development strategy particularly well. And instead of saying, hey, we drafted 9 times in the first 15, 20 picks in a 4-year window, and all we have to show for it are a 3rd-line left wing, a 2nd-line left wing maybe in Cooley, and a 6th defenseman. That means everything is up for debate now. It's not just, hey, we didn't pick the right guys and we didn't develop them. It's every part of how we do this, the pre-draft, the scouting, what types of players are we looking for? What traits do they have that we're prioritizing to make them successful? What do we do once we have them in our building? Do we keep them in the OHL at 19 and 20 and bring them up at 21 to the AHL and then there? Do we prioritize college guys because we've had a really good hit rate on college hockey guys over the last decade and a half? And the last point I'll make before I'll throw it back to you, part of the reason the Rangers were able to sustain contending for 7 years last decade is that when they got to 2015 and you saw the fading of that last group where you had traded away Callahan, St. Louis retires, you see Dan Girardi fading in real time, you see Mark Stahl fading in real time, you also identified, okay, we need to get a little bit younger. And you turned Brassard into Mika Zibanejad. You managed to land both Kevin Hayes and Jimmy Vesey as college free agents. That's how you sustain a window of contention. You recognize that guys need to be moved on from, and you target opportunities. We would not be in this situation right now if Schneider, Lafreniere, Kakko, Keandre Miller, etc., had taken steps over the last handful of years because they would be ready to lead this team now. Those would be the blue chip guys. You wouldn't have needed to trade for JT Miller last year because Lafreniere would be a 75, 80-point forward who's on power play one if it had worked out the way it needed to. And that's why they're here. Between 2017 and 2021, they drafted in the first round 9 times, and they have 2 of those guys left in the organization, 3 with Othman, but we don't know what he's going to be. That's all you got to show for it. You got 3 out of 9, and then you go down the rest of the list when we go to 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th rounders. Not a lot of organizational depth there either. So these are real big picture, long-term issues, and why, to your point, this isn't just, hey, we need to retool. If we're going to really do this, we need to reevaluate every part of how we do this, because that's why we're in this position. It's not just one thing. It's 5 things compounding into each other at once that has put the Rangers in this position where they don't really have a future on the roster.
And the thing, too, that we have to remember is if this isn't a quote-unquote rebuild and is a retool, what was last year? What would you call last season then? You and also the summer, right? You know, you're trading away Kreider, you trade away Trouba, you trade, you know, you're trying to get younger. You brought in Susi for reasons. You know, like you're still playing Urho Vakanainen, even though he was so bad that he is not playing for Team Finland, a team that is currently having one player that isn't even in the NHL on that roster, as opposed to Vakanainen on that blue line. So, you know, and I understand he was a throw in into that Trouba trade, but you know, the point stands that he's still here. You gave him an extension. You traded for Will Borgen and gave him a 5-year extension after 15 games. Yeah, you signed Parson into an extension, and then immediately after that extension, you made him disappear for. So then why give it to him? You know, there's a lot of questions here that remain unanswered. And last year, I would have to name a retool. What else would you name it other than like they were selling, and selling usually goes hand in hand with retooling, maybe even rebuilding if you want to call it that. And it didn't really work out for them, like hilariously. You know, like trading Trouba was an objective good at the time, and I still believe that. I still hold true that is the case. You also traded Kreider and never, you know, we talked about this multiple times on the show. You never filled that gap goal-wise, you know, player-wise. That is still a hole the Rangers have yet to fill with a player of that caliber. And, okay, well, you traded a 3rd-round pick to get Carson Soucy for, again, that trade is very silly to me. And that was part of a lost season. So the expectation now from that letter is, wait, but hold on, but trust me, I got this. And for me and for you, and we've talked about this for multiple years now on the show, don't tell me, show me. Show me that I can trust you with this process. Show me that you learned from, even last year, that you learned from last year's quote unquote retool, that you learned from all of your previous mistakes and even previous successes. Show me that you are more willing to replicate the good things that you did, as opposed to all the things that we have questions about. Show me that you can do this, and then maybe I'll have more confidence in the direction of the franchise. But as of right now, us on the show, a lot of the fans, we are well within our right to question if Chris Drury is the right person for this job, for the direction of the franchise, given this is his team. He built this team, and he had to retool last year, and now the Rangers are so bad, he had to put out another letter talking about how miserable this team is, and then he's going to retool. Okay, first of all, where was the letter last year in a season that everyone thought you were going to make the playoffs and you were so miserable that you missed it with the same team that made it to the conference finals? There was no letter then. And okay, so you put out a letter now with a team that continues to look like they just don't want to play, which is hilarious because they came out against Philadelphia and for, I want to say 2 periods at least, played like they wanted to win the cup, which is hilarious. And I understand, the Flyers goaltending situation isn't all that great. And, maybe they made the Rangers look a little better than perhaps that they were in that particular moment. But the point stands is, you come out, you score 6 goals against the Flyers team that is actively better than you, even if not by a wide margin, they're still better than you. I mean, you got embarrassed by Ottawa, a team that's directly in front of you in the standings, at home a few days ago. So at least there's, a little bit of, okay, wait, maybe there's a little bit of pushback from this roster against the Flyers. Like, that was nice to see. That was great. Now they go on that West Coast trip. We'll see if they, are backing that up. Like, maybe if they go on a little win streak, I don't even know what that would mean at this point. You put the letter out, so the expectation is that you stay true to that and you still sell, even if they, win a couple of games on the road here. But the point stands is, this is Drury's team. This is Drury's construction. This is Drury's not just NHL team, but AHL team as well. Like, this is his system, from top down. He's been here for 5 years, and last year was so bad that he had to retool on the fly, and this year it's so bad that he has to come out and call it a retool and put out a letter. So I want to see some kind of tangible change that makes me believe, okay, this is somebody that could do this. I don't want to see letters. To me, all these words don't. You
can't get your face in front of a camera,
yeah,
a baseline.
And no, that's a really good point, because Fitzgerald in New Jersey did it. He went and he had a press conference. Like, the Devils are reeling as well, and Tom Fitzgerald went on camera and answered questions, and it's I don't want to read too much into the nuance and then the little things here, but it's telling. It is very telling that Chris Drury, instead of doing what his rival GM did, which was the right thing to do when your team is not meeting the expectation set, but instead you don't answer questions. You don't come in, you don't even do a pre-recorded video. There's nothing. It is another letter. And when you release a letter, you skirt questions, right? Whenever you do a press conference, you have your opening statements, and then you have everybody in the room available to ask you whatever they want to ask you. When you do letters like this, you put out your opening statements and then say, all right, I'm out. You have fun reading every word of that. I'm going to go. It's not great. It's not a great look. I guess I appreciate the letter more than not saying anything.
Yeah, because to this point, it's been embarrassing. The team being this bad, and him I'm not even saying you have to talk about this. Just do a media hit. Go on the radio, even if it's not the New York market.
James Dolan did it. If James Dolan can do it, I think you can do it too.
Yeah, you can't call in the FAN. You can't call into Sportsnet. You can't do a 20 minutes with Elliot Friedman. You got to get in front of this stuff. And we're media people, so maybe we overvalue the presence of getting your message out ahead of it. But the Rangers have been flailing for 2.5 months. I mean, we did an episode, I want to say, either the first week of December or second week of December, that was effectively saying the season was over, that they were not making the playoffs, like declaratively, definitively, it was over. And we kept hearing, well, they're kind of interested in Kiefer Sherwood. And then, and the thing that bothers me and why I feel like that statement is disingenuous and why I feel like, to your point, they issued a statement as opposed to doing questions, for him to come out and say injuries have altered the trajectory of our season, that's nonsense. I said it before the game against the Flyers, and I said it more than once on Twitter with people I was arguing with. With Fox in the lineup, they're 14, 13, and 3. With Shesterkin in the lineup, they're 17, 12, and 5. That is a Vezina caliber goalie and a Norris caliber defenseman. If you're going to say we're a bottom 5 team in the league without our 2 best players, sure, most teams would be a bottom 5 team in the league without their 2 best players. But to insinuate that even with those guys, that this season would be going dramatically different is crazy. You have 35 games of example with Vezina caliber goaltending, with Norris Trophy caliber defense, that leaning into what you wanted to do, like we've been talking about a lot this year. You wanted to be a defense and goaltending team this year. You got what you wanted the first month and a half because the underlying numbers were great, but you couldn't score. Your power play couldn't work. So with all of that compounding into each other, for you to come around and say, well, the injuries have altered our calculus for the way this season is going is disingenuous. And the big point, and something I really have been thinking about a lot over the weekend in preparation for today's show, when you say retool, that tells me you think you have the foundational pieces in place to contend. You know, when Dallas did it, they didn't. Dallas had the end of the Ben and Sagan contracts that they wanted to ride out. And they hit on 5, 6, 7 draft picks in a short period of time. Washington, post-winning that cup, hadn't won a playoff series before last year since they won the Stanley Cup. And Washington looked around and said, well, we can try to be competitive in the end stages of Ovechkin's career, or we could just wave the white flag, and they have tried to be competitive. They aren't winning a Stanley Cup, though. Dallas, as much as I like them, I think they've assembled a really good core, hasn't won a Stanley Cup yet. And the reason I emphasize those 2 teams in particular is because that's the path. You need guys you draft to come in and take on the workload. Next, the fact that they were seriously floating the idea of Kiefer Sherwood tells me they don't understand their problem. Yes, innately, we need goals. He has 17 or 18 this year. Yes, he scores goals. That's good. How does he score them? Why is he scoring them? Why is he having a career year this year? What's different? He is what we like to call in the basketball world, bad team, good player. Very inefficient. You know, what Cam Thomas is doing on the Nets is a great example of what you can do on a bad team with no expectations. You can take as many shots as you would like, and it does not matter because it is not altering the trajectory of your season. And the reason I point to that, and it's what we said after the Tampa series, the New Jersey series, and the Florida series. You can like your guys all you want. Trocheck, Zibanejad, Panarin, Lafreniere, whoever. When I say you can like your guys, you don't have the guys. You don't have the Barkov Reinhardt, the Kachuk. You don't have an Eichel, a Stone, a Pietrangelo. You need that level of player. And to say retool tells me you think that 33-year-old JT Miller, 33-year-old Mika Zibanejad are your guys. And nothing to this point in their respective careers. And we have playoff experience for both of them, whether it was Miller against the Canucks a couple of years ago with against the Oilers when he was with the Canucks, Zibanejad in those 3 playoff series against New Jersey, Florida, Tampa Bay. Those guys are not Stanley Cup caliber top 6 players. Supporting cast, sure. You know, we talk all the time. If they had added Jack Eichel in 2021 and Zibanejad's the second line center, we're probably having a very different conversation about our perspective of Zibanejad going forward and what we think of the team. But because the Rangers' 2 best players are a defenseman and a goalie, their floor is a lot higher. Their ceiling's a lot lower. You need that blue chip top 10, 15 player in the league to be a forward. And you probably need more than one. You know, Vegas, Stone at the time, probably a fringe top 20 player in the league as far as forwards go. But you need more than one. And Zibanejad's never been that. Trocheck's never been that. JT Miller has 1 season of that. they don't have the guys to retool around. It would be one thing if, they had hit recently on draft picks and we were just waiting for those guys to make their debut, like Brian Leonard, excuse me. That's the Capitals prospect. If we had someone like that ready to jump into the mix, okay, you could talk to me about a retool. But the fact we got to start from scratch, where we got to go out and find at least one, if not two top six forwards to add to this group, those are the hardest things to get in the sport, are first line forwards. Those are the single most valuable and the single hardest thing to come by. And you can't tell me they're going to trade for Elias Pettersson, because we know that's not the type of player Chris Drury likes. Other than that, there aren't anybody in that tier of receding star with the capacity to jump. I mean, do you want 34-year-old Mark Scheifele? I'm sure the Jets would trade him to you, but those are the types of risks you're going to have. Exactly. That's the problem. And that's why, to your point, what you said 10 minutes ago, last year was your mulligan. You traded for JT Miller because you felt we were one piece away, and they have gotten worse. And you could say, well, he's injured. Yes, when you trade for older players who play a physical style of hockey, they are more susceptible to getting injured. Trocheck and him are going to stay getting injured into their mid to late 30s, because that's what happens when you get older. You don't recover as well, you don't heal as well, and you try and gut things out and make them worse. It is about as dire a situation as there is in the league, because they don't realize their best players aren't good enough, and their two best players are only going to get older in the time it takes for them to realize, wow, we couldn't win a Stanley Cup with Zibanejad at 34. That's crazy. Well, no, we've been saying this for 7 years now, that he's not a first-line center on a Stanley Cup team. You go look at the numbers. I wrote about it in 2021. You compare him to the centers in that cohort, the Bergerons, the Sagans, that tier of player at that time. He was 15th or 16th out of all of those guys, which tells you he's a lower echelon first-line center, which for the regular season is fine. When the other team has a future Hall of Famer opposite from him, he's going to have a bad time.
The Rangers made one cup final with Henrik Lundqvist. And, they had Lundqvist, they had Ryan McDonough, who was at the time their best defenseman. And the same story is being written again. I've read this book before. I've read the story of the Hall of Fame goaltender not being able to win a cup because the team around him just isn't good enough. We watched years of Dan Girardi or Mark Stahl at the top pair continue to give up goals at 5-on-5 on the power play just because it was just silly mistakes and costly turnovers that ultimately, I don't want to say like they directly caused the Rangers to lose the cup.
They did lose that one game in the cup final where Dan Girardi just passed the puck to the other team because he fell.
He sure did. Like, we've watched this movie, we've read this book before, and to see it unfold again is disappointing to say the least. Like, you would think that if a franchise went through that once, and not just for a year or two, this was Lundqvist's entire career where he was putting up unfathomable numbers. And
especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, especially. The playoff numbers are so much like they're video game numbers. That's how crazy he played in the biggest moments of the year. And he made one cup final, and they lost in 5 games in that series. Now, listen, like it sounds worse than it was. The Kings won a bunch of games in overtime, right? That series was incredibly close, and a couple bounces for the Rangers. And maybe, if they get one defenseman that's better than the 6 that they had, or maybe, one extra forward instead of, is not in that series particularly, but let's say in 2012 when their only trade was for John Scott, for reasons, and they still made the cup, and they still made the conference finals with John Scott on the bench and Stu Bickle on the ice. Like, that was it. So we've seen the Rangers, we've seen this franchise not go all in, cough a couple of years ago when they could have gotten Jake Ensel, and they could have gotten past. All they needed was a couple more goals against Florida. All they needed was an extra goal or two, and Jake Ensel would have provided that for them at that moment in time. Yeah, losing Gabriel Perreault would have been tough because he's going to be a fine player, but it's a lot easier of a pill to swallow when you have a ring So it's the inability to understand fundamentally where your issues lie and how to fix them in a way that, one, doesn't take too long, and two, fixes your problems right then and there, as opposed to piecemealing it over years and at that point being too late. That has been a problem for this franchise for a while now, and it's disappointing, to say the least, when you have had examples within your own franchise of past mistakes, happening, and where you've had Hall of Fame players on your team and you just did not have enough support around them to win a cup. And it really seems like they're writing the exact same story again and pretending that they wrote the damn thing. It's like, wait, you can't just you can't copy my homework, change a few words, and publish it pretending it's yours. Like, it's still the same book. You just change Lundqvist's name, which is Shesterkin. And I understand that Adam Fox is better than Ryan McDonagh, but the point stands. Change McDonagh's name to Adam Fox, and you have the exact same team. And it's very frustrating that this is happening again.
The NHL is a star-driven league. As much as we don't think of it, as much as we think of hockey as the ultimate team game, you need to have 2 or 3 genuine superstars on your team if you're going to win. The only outlier exception to that rule post-2010 is the Blues. If you want to tell me you want to be the once-in-a-15-year team, okay, that's not great math, but at least you can point to it. But that was an extraordinary set of circumstances where the better teams in the playoffs knocked each other out. The Blues were able to capitalize in a conference final, and they beat the Bruins pretty improbably, might I add, in the Cup final, where that Boston team was significantly more talented. And you think about all of the things that need to break right for that to happen. And I was talking about it over the weekend with one of my friends who was like, are you that surprised they fell apart as fast as they did? And I said, kind of, but not really, because you think about it. In 2022, they're down 3-1 to Pittsburgh, and Crosby gets hurt, and they pull that series out of their ass. They come back from 3-2 down against Carolina in the second round. They pull that out of their butt. 2024, they get the easiest first-round matchup anyone's gotten in the 2020s in that Capitals team that made the playoffs with a negative goal differential. It took a Kreider hat trick to get Carolina out of there in 6. But when the Rangers have made the conference final, historically, they have pulled off some freaky stuff. Where you think about in 14 and 15, both times in the second round, they're down 3-1, and they get to the conference final in spite of the fact that they were down 3-1 in the second round. And how difficult that is, how improbable that is. And it consistently feels like that's what the Rangers are playing for. This was our talking point a few weeks ago when the Olympic rosters were named, that they are constantly chasing the idea of the Miracle on Ice team because that's all they know. That's all they can think of. And it's the same thing here. They are looking at this through the lens of, we have the talent, we just need to try harder. We just need a better coach.
How long ago was Miracle, by the way? Can you remind me how
We're going
long
on
ago?
46 years next month.
Oh, and how many have they won? How many golds has Team USA won since 1980?
The same amount as you and I, Andrew. The same amount as you and I.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's really frustrating because they are doing the same exact thing again. And it makes it feel inconsequential, which is the worst thing. There is nothing worse than as a fan than apathy. I would rather be mad or upset, but if you're going to tell me we're going to retool, okay, you're going to go out and get a bunch of middle sixers. Maybe you load up and you try and trade for another 30, 31-year-old to try and bolster this group. But you can't tell me that Mike Sullivan, who just left Pittsburgh because he didn't want to embark on a rebuild, is going to put his most forward-thinking mindset into the development of these various young guys. And ultimately, and most importantly, are they going to be in a position to pick in the top 6 or 7 in the draft 2 or 3 times? And look, they're going to have their first this year. They have Carolina's first. They're going to probably get at least one more first between Panarin and Trocheck, if not 2. Maybe not this year, but next year. And maybe they're going to try and move up in the draft and go up to 3 or 4 from like 9. And even then, as we said 10, 15 minutes ago, okay, you're going to draft an 18-year-old who's going to do what? 2 years in the OHL, 1 year in the OHL. Maybe you get lucky and you go get your first overall, you take McKenna. Okay. Is he going to play another year in college too? Well, we need to give these guys time because we know there's not a spot for them at the NHL level. And more importantly, we know the Rangers don't know how to develop these guys. We have the last 5 years as evidence that Chris Drury's infrastructure does not develop NHL caliber talent, and more importantly, doesn't improve it, because we spent all of last year wondering when Miller or Lafreniere or Schneider was going to take a jump, was going to improve, was going to show some signs of, I am not stagnant. And that's the thing. Everybody who comes to the Rangers, other than Panarin, gets worse, gets slower, gets older. And what made them special wherever they happen to be doesn't happen. You know, I was reading scouting reports for Alexis Lafreniere over the weekend, and one of the things I was putting together. And people were talking about him like this was going to be a Nikita Kucherov caliber forward, that he was going to be 90, 100 points, one of the best playmakers in the league. And yeah, there were questions about his skating, but the Rangers haven't gotten him. And look, to be fair, his NHL edge stats, he's like 70th percentile in most of the skating. So above average skater, but not elite. And you see the limitations of somebody who doesn't have elite skating and doesn't have elite processing at the NHL level. The Rangers are in as dire a situation as you can be as a team because they don't recognize the party's over. You know, the music has stopped. Everyone is cleaning up, but the Rangers still think the party's going on, and they look awkward. They look dumb. And that's where they're at right now. This is over. If you wanted to, and we said this last year, if you were genuine in your we're going to change this around, you traded Shesterkin for a king's ransom last year, and you started genuinely over. Delaying it a year and then saying we're going to retool as opposed to rebuild because we don't want to waste Shesterkin and Fox, you're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, and trading Shesterkin and Fox would have been awful, right? Because it's with trades like that, you never get the value that you want. Look at, in the NBA when superstars actually do get traded, because the NHL, that doesn't happen. Like in the NBA, it's the for a team like the Bucks, right? Like where they're bad and Giannis is probably going to get traded. The Bucks are never going to be happy with what they get in return. It's point blank. You are never going to love the 3 dimes and a nickel that you get in return for $1. Trading away the dollar is always the hardest part of the job. And for the Rangers, if you trade away Shesterkin and you get a bunch of first round picks, maybe you get maybe a bunch of prospects, but again, the problem even then still would have persisted, if not worse, because now you trade away Shesterkin and you acquire all these assets for the hope that one of those picks could be Igor Shesterkin. And with the track record of how the drafting has gone, especially the past few years, there's not a whole lot of confidence in me to suggest that would have happened. Like, we mentioned this at the beginning of the episode where, yeah, you could trade Panarin for a first round pick, a top prospect, all these things. But if you do not develop them properly, or if you don't pick properly, then the first round pick doesn't mean anything. And all that happens if you trade Shesterkin, Fox, etc., is you get more kicks at the can, and for some reason you it's like you're Charlie Brown footballing this can. Like it gets moved away from you. You fall, you miss it, you do you're not kicking the can. You're doing everything but kicking the can, and it is exceedingly frustrating. Where the Rangers essentially have to rely on outside factors in order to acquire players that work at the NHL level. And it's conducive to their overall idea from a few years ago, right? Where we talked about the Rangers were at that time power play merchants. They couldn't get anything done themselves at 5-on-5. They had to rely on outside factors like the refs actually calling penalties, right? And they still rely on free agents wanting to come there, as opposed to we are going to develop and we're going to get these young guys into the best possible situations that we can in order to maximize their development, maximize their talent at the ages of 20, 21, 22, in order to get these guys up at the NHL level and into a system that works for them, and we can see the fruits of our labor. The Rangers have been relying on external factors, and here we are again. The Rangers are relying on external factors like college development, KHL development, Swedish development, wherever you want, as opposed to we are going to build the base of here is how we are going to overhaul our development system and how we are going to implement that. Because if you look at our track record, history has not been kind to our system. So we are going to acknowledge that and try to change that. We're going to try to fix that. We're going to try to improve that. We have seen that over the course of the better part of the past decade, if you don't want to go back farther than that, the development program that we have so far put into place has not worked out. Okay, let's fix the problem instead of having a broken leg and ignoring it. Your leg is broken. You ignoring it and pretending to walk on it and while having a limp and saying to everyone that everything is fine, people can see your leg is broken. You're not fooling anybody. You have to go and fix it until you acknowledge that, hey, there's a problem. We need to fix this. We need to address this. You can have all the first round picks that you want, but you have to figure out, one, the right people, the people that you're drafting, are they going to succeed at the NHL level? Which is, easier said than done for sure. But you've had enough top picks to change that, to change the course of your roster, and you haven't been able to do that. And not only that, you need to get a top player, but you also need to develop them into the player that you think they could be. Because so far, Kravtsov has been a bust. Anderson's been a bust. Heedle's been great. The injury situation was just too untenable, and that's very unfortunate for the Rangers and for Filipino. But even Alexis Lafreniere, you said it. He was supposed to be a Kucherov type player, and for half the games, I forget he's on the ice. How is that possible? That can't happen.
And the other part of this is these are areas where the Rangers should be able to flex their might. There's no cap on the spending on your infrastructure. You could have 1,000 assistants. You can have every player have their own skills coach. You can have as robust an AHL operation as you want. These are real areas where you can take advantage of the fact that you are the most powerful market in American hockey. You can take advantage of the fact your owner has billions upon billions of dollars, and that should be not even a question, because if teams like the Hurricanes and the Stars and the Lightning and the Panthers can put together strong AHL operations that consistently churn out even replacement level depth players, that matters a lot. And the Rangers do not get valuable pieces out of their own system. Might they get some? Yeah, every now and then. But you look at the success they had last decade, and that was manufactured by long-term patience, by building out slowly, by bringing up pieces through college and the OHL. And they don't have time right now. That's the undercurrent of why retool does not feel like the course of action. Does it suck that you would have to piss away 3 or 4 years of Shesterkin and Fox unless they were willing to be traded? Yeah. But we're going to end up having the same exact conversation 3 or 4 years from now about a team that isn't bad, but isn't good enough to win a cup, that's old, that's expensive, and is waiting for a player to become available in a trade, is waiting for somebody to get to unrestricted free agency. And without one of those blue chippers, and the only way to get them is the draft consistently. And can you actually turn what you get in the draft into something? And there are so many layers to why the Rangers are in this position right now. This is long term. This is not just a Chris Drury problem. This isn't even just a Jeff Gorton problem. This goes all the way back. This is a 15, 20 plus year problem in player development because the AHL operation just isn't where it needs to be. Because the NHL operation, when it comes to player development, is not where it needs to be. One of the comparisons I heard someone make that I think is really good and why as early as 2021 I started to be a little worried. You remember the parachute game in gym class where you pull it out and you got to run under it?
Yeah.
That only works if everybody's pulling at the same time, right? You can't get it high enough to run under it if not everybody's going in the same direction. And that's the problem the Rangers had. In 2019, they were a year and change into rebuilding, and they went out and got Panarin, Trouba, and Adam Fox and said, okay, we're not going to be terrible this year. Kakko, you're ready for the NHL, even though he wasn't. And his development wasn't really a priority. And you look at the way these guys have been treated and who they've played with and the types of responsibilities they've been given, and you aren't maximizing them. You aren't helping them do what they're good at. And in turn, you're stuck with these husks of what were once promising prospects. It's really befuddling that we're just going to run this back effectively. And that should be your big takeaway. It's not that the Rangers rebuild from 17 to 21 failed. It's that they never really gave it an honest chance. In bringing in Panarin and Trouba and Fox, you immediately started the clock. And look, I still don't, and we probably never will know the exact impetus for James Dolan firing Jeff Gorton and John Davidson in 2021. But the official narrative is that he was pissed they didn't make the playoffs that year, even though, they picked first overall the year before. Panarin missed 3 weeks because he had to go take care of that family stuff. And you fired them for not making the playoffs. And then your GM you hired's recourse was to bring in a bunch of bottom sixers and a really big, slow, lumbering Swedish defenseman. And you made the playoffs and you went to the conference final because your goalie had one of the 5 best goalie seasons of the 21st century. And you thought you were off and running. It's really, when you look at it in the historical context of how you got here, and it's really important you do that because nothing happens for one reason or two reasons. We're talking hundreds of decisions over a decade that got the Rangers to this point. And when you lay it out, evident by evidence, it really becomes obvious why this didn't work. It really becomes straight up. You have 10, 15 years of evidence about what the Rangers need to do to be successful when it comes to their player development, and more importantly, what doesn't work for them.
Well, we have all this evidence. I wonder if we're gonna use it. It's like you're at a crime scene and you see all these fingerprints and all these clues to suggest who would it be, and you just stand there like, I wonder who did this. I don't know. It's frustrating and it's just at a point where I at the cost of repeating myself, like. You have so much history, recent history, to look back on and see what worked and what didn't work. And instead of learning from those mistakes and trying to change, the way that you handle things, or trying to, even understand like, okay, these things that I did or were done before me were handled well in hindsight, because you have the benefit of hindsight to see what happened as a result of past choices. You can use hindsight to understand what you did well and what you didn't do well, what other people did well and what they didn't do well, and yet it just isn't really being utilized. And that's the part that is deflating more than anything. You want your general manager to look around and say, my retool year was last year. And not only did we get worse, oh my God, like everything went wrong last year and they missed the playoffs by 6 points. That isn't happening this year. And they're even worse. How does that happen? That is on the roster building. That's on the roster construction. That is on watching what happened last year and not changing really much of, like a lot of the core is still there. And, you can argue, oh, well, they have no move clauses. Who gave them to them? Who gave those no move clauses, those no trade clauses, those 10-team no trades, those 8-team whatever, those big contracts? Who gave it to them? This is on the person that gave them those contracts. Oh, you can't.
Or the ones who traded for it. That's the other thing.
Or traded for them. Yeah, exactly.
I've seen people playing very stupid about, well, he didn't give Carson Soucy his no trade clause. It doesn't matter. He traded for it. Same thing with JT Miller.
Everybody on this contract seemingly has on this team seemingly has a no move clause or no trade clause or whatever. And even if you're not the one that put pen to paper on that no move clause, you traded for him. He's on your team. So, of course, it's going to be harder to trade those players away. You have an entire team of guys that can't be moved. So, it's going to be hard. I wonder who gave it to them or who acquired them.
I'm really just at a loss because we have seen James Dolan historically be pretty reactionary to when things don't go to plan. And for him to very actively say, not only am I going to give him more time, I'm publicly going to say I'm going to give him more time, and I'm going to allow him to sell off pieces that were supposed to be part of a contender. The last thing I'll say, and we'll get out of here on this, if I go to the casino and I play 10 hands of blackjack and I lose 8 of them and win 2 of them, eventually I'm going to have to deal with those consequences. Maybe not that night, maybe not the end of that week, but the 30% cash advance against my credit card, I'm going to have to deal with that. The repercussions of not having the money for the rest of the weekend, I have to deal with that. To just say, well, no, I'm just going to borrow more money is ridiculous. And that's the thing here. It would be one thing if last year goes differently. If they go out in round 1 last year and then this year happens, it's a different conversation. But last year falling off the tracks as bad as it did, where it entirely fell apart to the point there were questions about the direction of the franchise, to follow that up with, no, we just need a new coach. We replaced Lindgren with Gavrikov. We're going to be fine. And then to get a half season's worth of results of a mediocre to outright bad team, and then say we're going to rebuild, even though a week ago you were talking about
it's a retool. It's not a rebuild. It's a very plain. This will not be a rebuild. I'm looking at the letter right now. You can't call it a rebuild.
Retool is code for we're going to suck, but we're going to try and make the playoffs so that way everyone feels good. That's what retool means. It's we can't win the Stanley Cup. We're not good. We're not bad enough to draft in the top 5 of the lottery, but we're going to try really hard. And we see how the Rangers trying really hard is going with the no BS of JT Miller leading the way. I don't get it. I truly don't get how you look at this situation and think the general manager deserves. He's had 5 years to overhaul the organization. Last year was the first real salvos at reshaping things, and he made the team worse. He brought in Borgen and Soucy and Vakanainen and said, okay, this is a defense that's good enough to win. Before the season started, we knew this defense wasn't going to be good enough, and we knew the depth forwards weren't going to be good enough, and that the top-end guys weren't good enough to offset the badness of the roster. It is just mind-boggling that we're sitting here right now having this conversation. This was obvious the team wasn't going to score enough this year, even though they played great defense for a month and a half, 2 months. It was always going to come to a point where you can't play perfect defense indefinitely for a full season and expect to win games scoring 2.5 goals per game. You just can't in today's NHL. And the GM is only almost certainly going to triple down on defense and goaltending and forechecking and physical play because that's the shortcut. You can hang around in a lot of games if you do that. You're not going to win a lot, but you'll hang around. You'll be competitive. You'll be proud. I don't really want to be proud. I would like to win hockey games.
The Rangers now, according to FanDuel, are plus 1,400 to make the playoffs. That number was a lot lower like 2 weeks ago when we first partnered with them. Like that line was a lot closer to, plus like 200 or whatever it was. Plus 1,400 now.
Yeah, 14 to 1. They're done.
And they're plus 115 tonight at Anaheim. I mean, that
if you're on the East Coast and you're staying up to watch that tonight, you're a sicko. You got to have something better to do. I'm just going to be honest with you.
I'll have it up because I'm sicko. I'm a psychopath and I'm crazy. But yeah, I mean, like this game doesn't change anything. You're watching it because you're a lunatic, just like I am, just like Nick is. I'm Nick. I would imagine that you're gonna watch the game as well. Like both of us are crazy lunatics, and if you're watching it alongside with us, then you're one too. And I feel like if you got to this point of the podcast, you're a lunatic by default. So welcome and congratulations on the title. But like. Yeah, like the game to game no longer matters. This team is not going to make the playoffs. They need pretty sizable changes if people's confidence in the team, whether that's Nick's confidence, my confidence, or the general consensus, confidence has to improve, and that starts with shifts. That starts with not just winning one or two hockey games. This starts with, the Rangers coming out with, leaking the trade to Elliot Friedman 8 seconds before the trade happens, or the Rangers just breaking in, then Elliot Friedman going like this, quote tweeting in, just going like this with the finger pointing emoji under it. And, with a pretty big trade, if Trocheck gets traded for a haul, if Panarin gets traded for a haul and a half, even if, there's a middle sixer that gets traded for, a pretty sizable return, then my confidence will start to increase. And maybe even the Rangers would, like, let's say Drury gets a lot of assets for these guys and he flips two or three of them and gets a potential top six player or something like that. Then, my confidence will go a lot higher than what it is right now. Because as it stands, I've seen there's enough track record here for me to have a pretty good understanding of how Chris Drury operates and how the trades are going to go. And right now, my confidence is not very high. Show me, GM Chris Drury, that I'm wrong. Prove to me that I am wrong, and then we can have a conversation about it. But until then, this is where I stand, at least.
There's nothing to lead you to believe they understand the problem. There's nothing that leads you to believe that Chris Drury is looking at this roster and says, okay, I know what I need to do. Now, things can change. Maybe they do get a bunch of good picks or prospects, and a year from now, they're in a much better position. But they got to go out there and do it. And that's the hardest part. It's very easy to get assets. It's another thing to actually turn them into anything. But that'll do it for this week's edition of Liberty Blue. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in this week. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. We'll talk to you guys either next week or the next time they do something stupid.
Later.